I'm going to say something that I know is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of staunch Conrad defenders, but being academically gifted, accomplished, studying medicine, well, that's very nice. It doesn't make someone a better person, a decent love interest, or even more mature in a lot of ways that matter. And commenting this on unrelated videos all the time to try to dismiss people's points is not the hot take that you all think it is. And I'm going to say something. I don't care that Jeremiah jokingly told people he majored in bearology at all. And I think people jumping to use this as some kind of scathing criticism against Jeremiah is really dumb for a lot of reasons. Number one, because the context in which this is mentioned in book 3 is another thing that makes Belly look really awful, not Jeremiah. So this is mentioned in book 3 during Belly and Jeremiah's argument, where she unnecessarily comes for his existence and destroys his self-esteem, which he never did to her, never got nasty like this and started poking at her insecurities or saying mean things. This really did not have to go there, but when she says, "Don't put your inferiority complex on me," she thinks it was something I had thought before but never voiced. Conrad was the one who was pre-med. Conrad was the one at Stanford working a part-time job at a lab. Jeremiah was the one who told people he majored in bearology. It's very normal for 19-year-olds to not know what they want to do with their lives, career-wise or major-wise. And the thing is, Belly literally also doesn't have an established major either. And I think this totally makes sense and is completely understandable for somebody like Jeremiah, who was never valued or taken seriously by his family or the people around him, to the point where even if he worked really, really hard and achieved something close to Conrad's level, it would never result in any kind of praise or acknowledgement for him. Just circle back to Conrad. And how could Conrad let somebody as inferior as Jeremiah surpass him in any way, as we see here with their dad? And that's why Jeremiah actively avoids things that would put him in competition with Conrad. This is also a huge part of why Jeremiah doesn't take anything seriously. It's really not that he doesn't take anything seriously, but that nobody ever took him seriously. And while Jeremiah is actually not nearly as lazy or incompetent as people make him out to be in book 3, the moments of immaturity displayed by him in that book are nothing villainous or unworkable, but pretty typical of a 19-year-old whose father doesn't parent him or acknowledge him and throws money at him instead, with a dead mother who was never taken seriously, invested in, or guided in the way that his brother was, and was taught from a very young age by everyone in that family in different ways, not just his dad, that he is inferior, less valuable, less important, his feelings matter less, not as good or valued, bottom line. And I'm also not surprised that he might have felt a bit directionless when he got to college and didn't know what to say, so jokingly told people that he majored in bearology, especially because the only thing that he was ever really valued or celebrated for was being fun and social and a good time and unserious, which is why I can also understand why Jeremiah enjoyed being in a fraternity so much, where he was popular and liked and felt like he had a family and brothers. So in conclusion, the bearology argument does absolutely nothing for me, and while I'm currently of the opinion that season 3 is going to deviate quite a bit from book 3, if they include this little bearology comment in season 3, it's not going to make me love him any less. And I just don't particularly care that Golden Child Condiment got into Ivy Leagues and studies medicine. Well, that's great and a wonderful accomplishment and achievement for him. It doesn't mean very much to me if you're a terror to be around, a horrible love interest, dig into people's insecurities instead of communicating, rude, backhanded, elitist, condescending, and just an overall flop of a romantic hero. And I think it's glaringly clear that Conrad is not so very mature in a lot of very important ways, and that is continuously demonstrated from books 1 to book 3. So we all know Conrad makes that comment in the car about, "I was gonna get you a sweatshirt from Stanford, but Finch is fun," which is really nasty and elitist and insulting to Jeremiah, obviously implying like he's not going to an Ivy League, he's just going to Finch. But that's also insulting to Belly, because we know she is likely attending Finch as well. But this is even more telling and nasty because Belly excitedly told Conrad earlier in the season when they were on the phone that a college scout from Finch might be coming to watch her volleyball game, and she was really excited about it. And then he still says that and you want me to root for him as a love interest for her. I pointed this out in my story and a few of you asked me to talk about it, and I think it really highlights a huge point in why a lot of us cannot get behind Conrad, and certainly not get behind him as Belly's love interest, even if in the show at least we have some sympathy for him as a character. For as much as people love to talk about Jeremiah having an inferiority complex and use it against him as if he wasn't taught and groomed by everyone around him to have one since he was a child, and like reduce every one of his actions and feelings to being about that, people really love to turn a blind eye to Conrad's perceived superiority, which is something I clocked right away in the books and one of the most off-putting parts of his personality. And as much as they tried to soften him in the show and did him so many favors, it's still there. Conrad is rude and elitist and throws people's insecurities in their faces, which he pays very close attention to at the first opportunity. And he does it too often and too consistently for me to write it off with, oh, he didn't mean it like that. And here's the thing, as much as he's not my favorite, I expected Corny to react with some degree of hurt and anger after seeing Jeremiah and Belly kiss, even though I really don't think he had any right. Of course that's hurtful, it doesn't matter, right? But his arsenal and the first things he reaches for say a lot about him. Jeremiah and Belly are stupid and inferior. How many people Jeremiah hooked up with? Not only is it always grow up and you're just a kid, but Belly is a mistake and he never liked her anyway and he never should have started something with her. And as much as he's so much worse in the books and they softened it a lot in the show, including by having him apologize for certain things when he's called out, even though he continues to do the same thing anyway, it's still there and it's still awful. And I think the kindest reading you could give him, and I can't even give him this in the books, honestly, but is that maybe he doesn't really believe these things, but is doing it to be hurtful. But that's still terrible. And I don't know, how many times can we say he didn't mean it like that when he does it consistently and sometimes unprovoked? I'm tired of this, like, just because a man is emo and self-deprecating sometimes, he doesn't think or act like he's better than everybody else all the time when he does. And they all will say things in anger that they don't mean, right? And that's normal, that's to be expected. But why is it that Conrad reaches for these nasty, unrelated digs that he knows will hurt people? Everybody gave Jeremiah absolute hell for when he found out about Belly kissing Conrad the same time that he finds out that his mom is dying, and he never even said anything nasty like that. But this is just sassy Conrad, when in reality, it's just him throwing people's insecurities in their faces and being nasty instead of communicating, and it makes me think of how Book 3 Belly really took that trait on and did that to Jeremiah when he never ever did that to her. There's decided undertones to the unrelated things that Corny decides to pull out of his pocket at the right moment, and it's a loathsome quality in my opinion. And you could say, like, okay, Conrad and Jeremiah, they're brothers, there's like a lot of built up stuff there, there's rivalry that happens with siblings, they're gonna go back and forth at each other, okay, fine. But Conrad does it to Belly frequently, and especially because Belly's like characterization is based in a lot of insecurity, I just cannot abide. I'm not rooting for the girl who spent so much time like feeling less than and not worthy enough to be with that guy, especially when Jeremiah has been so consistently supportive and encouraging of Belly and her interests and her goals, and Dirt Rat is supposedly the one who challenges her. Meanwhile, she was doing poorly in school while they were together. Like, Conrad and Steven need to ride off into the sunset together, because no way. It's like the condensation ruining major events thing. If it was just prom, maybe I could forgive it. Or if he handled it well after that, maybe I could forgive it. But how many times does he have to do it and I have to say, oh, he didn't mean it like that, it was just because he was going through this, before we admit that he's just a flop? And he is not better in Book 3. First of all, you shouldn't have to wait that long for the love interest to be remotely decent. And second of all, he's not better. And so one thing about me is, if I have to sit through a Bonrad wedding play out on screen at some point, and again, I do not necessarily think that's happening in season 3, but if it does, at any point, I do not want Jeremiah at that wedding. That will hurt me so deeply, because it hurts me so much the way that it happens in the book, where he and Belly almost got married, and to watch Laurel and everybody be so against it and with such disdain, and after his whole life he was taught over and over again that he matters less than Conrad and is less valuable and liked less, and then for them to get married a few years later, and he also loses Belly, what he loved most, to Conrad, and he has to be there at that wedding. I kind of want Jer to never speak to them again or really have his hurt be visible. If it happens like the book where she blows a kiss to him at the wedding, then I have no choice but to assume that they are or are going to have an affair, and one of the kids is going to be blonde and ocean-eyed, and that's the thing about illicit affairs. But whatever, just between us, my twin flame bruise painted blue jellyfish, I will be so annoyed and devastated if they make it like Jer is just like happy-go-lucky and okay with them if this happens. Because I know he's not. You know he's not. We know that he's not. I know that he's not okay with it at that wedding in the book, and it's just insulting to imply that he would be. I don't see how they can do that, especially after the dynamic changes in the show and how Jeremiah has already expressed, I don't think I can take it if you change your mind like last time. It would just be insane. And I actually have a lot more to say about why I really think that the plot of season 3 is going to deviate greatly from the plot of book 3, and why I don't necessarily think that we're seeing that Rush Jelly engagement plot play out in season 3. I really doubt it, actually, and I'll talk about that later. But basically, a lot of what the plot of book 3 hinges upon has already been established and uprooted in the show thus far. And while I've never had much hope in a Jelly endgame, as much as I want it and as much as I would love it, I have like a 20% Delulu hope that we might get something. But if we see something like the plot of book 3 play out, I would hope that it would be like the book in that Belly and Jeremiah are together until the very end. And I don't want to see him slapped with another love interest. And it's not because I don't want to see Pookie happy. Of course I do. But it would just feel so cheap and like a way to appease the other side, as it often does, so that they can feel like vindicated and less guilty, and the Bonrad ending can feel more like cohesive and meant to be and less awful. Like, see, he doesn't really care, he's okay, it wasn't really true love, he's okay with them, when like so much of his story was about this like gutting deep love for Belly, and like their love was so significant. It just feels so disrespectful and cheap, and I would hate it personally. And I know some of you agree with me, just that kind of like cheap way that they try to like tie up the loose end in the love triangle always feels very disrespectful, and it's almost always like bad or like not significant. And like, you guys know that I really don't like book 3, and I hate the like stupid rushed engagement plot, but to think that after this, like this moment where they get engaged and she says the joy I felt in that moment, I couldn't even put it into words. This whole thing about I knew his face well, maybe better than anybody now, every line, every curve. I knew his face even better than my own, the hours I'd spent staring at it while he slept, tracing my finger along his cheekbone. Maybe he'd done the same things to me. I didn't want to see a mark on his face one day and not know how it got there. I wanted to be with him. His was the face I love. The joy she felt was indescribable, and you have the audacity to say that she wasn't in love with him. Like, I hate this book, but they were in love. It's true. She loved him so much. When she looked at him, she saw past, present, and future. I can't believe this wasn't the endgame ship. Like, just imagine them actually getting married years later, and like Jelly deserved the finding their way back to each other book. Anyway, they did get married. They named their baby Daisy. I'm not a question for the Bonrad enthusiast community. If you are genuinely so secure in your endgame and like they're infinite, he caught a cheeseburger and they're meant to be because the stars point their way, Why were you so butthurt about this? Why did the season 2 ending and every kiss, everything that happened in season 2 send you into such a fit to the point where, like, if somebody is talking about Jelly or something that they like, you come to the comments and are like, oh my gosh, like, just wait until season 3, you're gonna suffer. Like, I don't even have to utter the roach's name and you'll come, like, crawling, like, oh my god, Jeremiah this, blah, blah, blah. Like, if you know very well that it's all gonna be wrecked in season 3, right? Bonrad Endgame, why do you care? I genuinely want to know the answer, because I have to wonder, is it because Jelly makes Bonrad look really terrible? Is it because this has been shown to just be the more romantic ship with the better tension, love, tenderness, chemistry, kisses, and everything like that? Because I feel like that might be it. Like, is it because your ship and Cornroach looking like a remotely decent love interest relies on Jeremiah having some kind of downfall, and even then in the books, like, he's horrible in the last book, and they only had a one-page endgame, and Belly didn't even choose him? She chose Jeremiah until, like, the last page? Because I feel like if I was so secure in my ship and my man as this amazing love interest who deserves to prevail in the end, I wouldn't be so offended by stuff like this. And I also wonder, is it because the dynamics that have now been established in the show make it pretty impossible for them to stick exactly to the plot of book 3? And like I've said from the beginning, I have never had much confidence in a Jelly endgame. It's not like you're telling me anything that I don't know. I went through this grief 10 years ago when the books came out, and I'm gonna go through it again because that's just who I am as a person, and this is the better ship. Like, I'm not gonna support a terrible ship just because they're endgame. But I wonder, is it because it makes you nervous because it's not gonna be like that? Like, it's not going to play out exactly the way that it did in the books. Not that I think the books do any favors for Conrad or Bonrad at all. They certainly don't. But I wonder if it's that, because, like, again, we obviously don't know where the ending is going. Like, if I had to bet, I would bet on Bonrad being endgame, but I think there very well might be more than 3 seasons. It obviously can't play out exactly like the books. And I wonder if it's also because so many people fell in love with Jeremiah and Jelly, as they did in the books too, but, like, now it's just a larger population, and it makes your ship look really bad. I think that's it. I really do. I think it's because he threatens you. That's why it's the, oh, he's a narcissist, attempted unaliver, choking allegations, because he threatens you. Like, he's that iconic. Jelly is that iconic. And that's why, like, I love them. I think it's also because you hate to grapple with the fact that Belly was in love with Jeremiah. She actively chose him and wanted to be with him. But the thing is, that happened in your Precious books too, so I don't know. A few people have mentioned this to me and asked me to talk about it now. Apparently people are comparing Belly and Conflagration's relationship in book 3 to The Notebook. And I have to say, one of my most unpopular opinions next to I don't like fall is I'm not really a fan of The Notebook, and I'd have to revisit it to properly roast this one. But if I was a fan of The Notebook, I would be really appalled by this comparison. I do just find The Notebook kind of boring and not super romantic. Personally, I just never really loved it. But even I can say that's pretty funny. I'm trying to figure out why they think that. I'm guessing it's because of the, like, she's getting married thing. But this is not what happened. Don't tell me they're saying that because of the letters. Don't tell me they're trying to compare him, oh, I wrote you a letter every day, to those borderline harassment, negging, backhanded letters that Cornucopia wrote after he got rejected by Belly and she was in Spain and not responding to him. Don't tell me it's because of these, because the jokes will write themselves and I'll have no choice. Is it because, I guess it's gotta be because she's getting married, but that's not comparable. They do know that in We'll Always Have Summer, Corncob confesses to Belly for the first time that he has feelings for her, like a day before her wedding to his brother, and she rejects him. Like, this pick me, choose me speech that he does, which is, I'm sorry, it's so bad and pathetic. You think, like, that's not because, oh, like, circumstances kept them apart and he was writing to her? Like, no, he, like, degraded her and was like, I don't want you, and I never did. Shows up literally a day before the wedding and says this. I'm not really a Nicholas Sparks fan like that, but I would be appalled. So when I talked about how I do not think season 3 is going to stick all that closely to the plot of book 3, particularly how I don't necessarily see the teen engagement plot with Jeremiah and Belly happening, a lot of people brought this up, Susanna's letters and how we do see her writing the letters in the season 2 finale, and we also see the envelopes get mixed up, and how that obviously means that it's foreshadowing. And what I wanted to say is that these letters are yet another thing that confirm that it has to be different from the books, because the significance that these letters held in the books have already been rendered essentially pointless thus far in the show. So if you don't know what these letters are, in the book, Susanna writes letters for all the kids on their wedding day. And on the morning of Jeremiah and Belly's wedding, Condominium goes to find Jeremiah because he has understandably run off on his own, because Conman decides to confess his feelings for Belly and tell her that he loves her for the first time. They have not had a relationship at this point. He does this for the first time like a day before she is supposed to marry Jeremiah. Belly tells Jeremiah about this and he is understandably distraught. He does this whole pick me, choose me, literally like right before they're supposed to get married. So Cobblestone goes to find Jeremiah that morning, and that's when they get into this fight. And this is the one and only time that Jeremiah throws the first punch in the books. Now, interestingly, which is another point, this dialogue, this "you're a coward and I don't want to know you," and even like talking about like you treated Belly like trash, this is extremely reminiscent, almost verbatim, to the fight in the party episode in season 2, which is another thing that really points to whatever happens next in the show is going to be different, because this is another thing that has already happened. But regardless, Conundrum gives the letter that's supposed to be for Jeremiah on his wedding day to him, and he opens it, and it is not Jeremiah's letter. It's for Corner Store, which is just so devastating and brutal, and just so Jeremiah can get hurt and have one more hit before the end of the chapter, and it happens all over again. Anyway, point is, we don't actually get to see the letter, but we know that Susanna writes in it that she only got to see Coney Waffle in love once, and that was with Belly. And I will say she was really weird for that, not only because she and Laurel really pushed them together like two paper dolls, and it was very damaging in a lot of ways, but because imagine if Conduit married somebody else, and then not only does he read about Belly on his wedding day to somebody else from Susanna Beyond the Grave, but like what if his like the person that he was marrying saw that? But regardless, in the books, this revelation is major and a catalyst for the following events. In the show, this wouldn't be any kind of revelation, because although he still has not actually said it to her, coward that he is, and I'm sorry, Jeremiah was not wrong, and you cannot ask me to root for somebody like that as a love interest. That's just ridiculous. Belly has been with Condemnation at this point, and both she and Jeremiah have the confirmation that he loves her, right? He gave her this half-forced confession while he was laying with his back turned to her, and they have that conversation by the trash cans, you know, dumping their trash love in the garbage, where, you know, she says, "I loved you and I know you loved me too." This can no longer act as a catalyst. And another important point is a big moment in book 3 is Jeremiah calls off the wedding, and he is the one who pushes Belly and Kulata to admit their feelings, explore their feelings, be together if that's what they want to do, right? He says, "I won't be the reason you don't go to him." As much as it breaks his heart, he's the one to do that. And this has also essentially already happened in the show. That's what this scene is. Him pushing them to talk and be together if that's what they want. But Belly has already been with Cordyceps, and she picks Jeremiah. In the book, she hasn't actually had any kind of real relationship with Contraband. Like, this is a huge dynamic shift. So while I do think those letters will make some kind of appearance in season 3 or 4 or whatever, I do not see how they could possibly be in the same capacity, because it just wouldn't make sense anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't in a wedding capacity at all. I've talked about this at length, but I do feel that the Deb Ball and all the wedding hints that we have seen so far are more like an homage and a representation of what happens in book 3, not necessarily foreshadowing. Of course, I could be wrong. It could happen. But I ask you honestly, do you think that college Belly and Jeremiah getting engaged seems like it fits for them? Do you think it fits for the tone of the show, what we've seen happen so far, and the current viewership of the show, the current audience? Because honestly, it didn't really fit then 10 years ago. It didn't really fit for book Jeremiah and Belly. I don't see how it fits at all or would make sense for show Jeremiah and Belly. That makes even less sense. And to be clear, if I had to bet, I would bet on a Bonrad endgame. As much as I don't want it, I would bet on us having to suffer through the same grief we had to sit through in the books, where season 2 was so absolutely beautiful and then it gets ripped away from us. Maybe I'm wrong entirely. Maybe Jelly will be endgame. I doubt it. I want it, but I doubt it. Maybe it'll be interactive. Like, we don't know, but I'm telling you, there is just no way that this can have the same kind of significance. It would not only be redundant with what has happened in the show thus far, but the stakes that you're like salivating over for these like grand declarations and changes have already been reached in the show. So while I think staunch Bonrads will most likely get their endgame and we'll have to sit through some corny Bonroach wedding, hopefully Jeremiah's not in attendance. I'll be so upset. Or she blows him a kiss and I assume they're having an affair because I know that's the truth. Either way, don't hold your breath for an exact play-by-play of We'll Always Have Summer, because it's just not going to happen. This is one of those things, I think about it quite often. One of the weirder things that Susanna does in the books is write in Conrad's letter that she wanted him to read on his wedding day that she only saw him in love once, and that was with Belly. And I have a lot to say about Susanna because she's so fascinating. She's very complex. It's not all bad, but I mean, how bizarre. Like, imagine, number one, that Cornflake was getting married to somebody other than Belly, as was pretty likely, and he opens this letter and he hears about Belly on his wedding day. Even more than that, what if the person he's marrying sees that? And then I think about also, what if it had been Jeremiah and Belly, as it should have been? What if they were married or together or something, and he reads this letter, and then the person he's marrying reads it too, and it's like, your sister-in-law? The Bonrad agenda this woman had, obscene. And to be fair, it was not just her, it was Laurel pulling those strings as well. And she does get criticism now for like the she was destined for one of my boys thing, which yes, but let's be real. It really wasn't one of my boys, was it? It was Condiment. And I have my ideas and theorizations about why it was Condyle, but everybody's saying, like, I don't think that they can include that in the show if she writes that in the letter, because she, like, explicitly knows about the love triangle and she knows about Jeremiah's feelings for Belly. And I agree in that the letters, like I said, could not possibly be used in the exact same context or be the exact same in the show because it wouldn't make sense at this point. Like, it doesn't have the same significance, but I wouldn't put that past her or them including that in the show, because don't forget, she told Belly, take care of Conrad, knowing full well. And I thought it was pretty sad, honestly, in the books that Susanna didn't seem to notice at all that Jeremiah had feelings for Belly when it was so obvious, right? And she was so lovey-dovey and pushing and excited for Bonrad when Connie Baby wasn't even giving anything. And in the show, they do have her realize and they talk about it, so she would like explicitly know at this point, so it would be crazy. But we already saw the take care of Conrad, so I don't know. That's why I'm like a little bit hopeful, but I don't trust it. I don't trust Jeremiah not getting treated like dirt again. I really don't. It's just so interesting and sad how overlooked Jer Bear is, because I wouldn't even necessarily say that Susanna liked Conditioner better, but she prioritized him and contributed to that dynamic just like everybody else did. Tragic. I have two genuine questions for the Team Conrad Collective, and I am genuinely seeking answers. And if you can provide me with those answers, then we will go from there. Genuinely seeking answers. Number one, I've been asking this one for a month and has not gotten a single answer. Can anybody provide me with one example of how this man challenged Belly in a positive way or helped her to grow in some way, like Steven said? Follow-up question. How and when did we end up with Steven, fake friend, homewrecker, and cheater as our authority on love interests? For the read the books crowd, as somebody who is very familiar with the books and makes content about it regularly, what is there in books 1 and 2 that make Conrad a good love interest and make you want to root for him. And that is not me insinuating that I in any way think he is any sort of good love interest in book 3. But I'm asking, if you really think that he's an amazing love interest in book 3, what is there in books 1 and 2 that make you want to hold out for him to receive redemption and forgiveness and glorification as a love interest? What did he do in books 1 and 2 that make him at all suitable for that kind of role? Follow-up question, do you genuinely think it's satisfying or good or valid for somebody to act the way that Conrad does in books 1 and 2 if they act okay in the very end of the story? Second follow-up question, do you genuinely think that it is romantic for a love interest to never be able to admit that he has feelings for you, never fight for you, or put himself out there for you, or even be honest with you until you're about to marry somebody else, and that's what it takes for him to tell you that? Do you genuinely find that romantic, and why? And a few stipulations that I have to put down. Can you do this without mentioning Jeremiah? Can you answer any of those questions without talking about Jeremiah? And can you do it without talking about symbols and Taylor Swift songs? It has to be in his actions. Can you give me examples in Conrad's actions or no? Okay, so those are my questions. Thank you for listening, and I genuinely hope to find some answers. Why was Susanna so Team Bonrad? I do unfortunately think this makes sense for a few different unfortunate reasons. And let me preface by saying I am about to go in, but to be clear, I don't even hate Susanna. I think she has a lot of redeeming qualities and is likable in a lot of ways. I do understand people who just straight up hate her though, and we gotta be real. So Susanna does get some heat now for setting up the "she was destined for one of my boys" thing with Belly by telling her that, but let's be serious, it wasn't one of my boys. We know who it was. First of all, let's just get it out of the way and address the elephant in the room. Why are we surprised that this man's wife would romanticize a relationship like Bonrad as if she wasn't a card-carrying member of the Bob the Builder division of I Can Fix Him herself? My friends hated him, told me he was a bum and an emotionally withholding jerk. He didn't treat me right, but he was hot and I believed in us and I set my mind on him. You know very well that was her narrative. And I'll say it one more time. The people we have rooting for Bonrad are Susanna Struggle-Love Fisher, emotionally withholding divorcee Laurel, and Show Steven, cheater, homewrecker, and fake friend. And we were counting on them to be on the right side of history. And speaking of, with Laurel being Team Bonrad and just as inappropriate with it as Susanna was, especially in the books, which I talked about, I think that stems in part from the fact that number one, Connie Baby is Laurel's favorite by a long shot, and that is in part because Laurel sees herself in Conrad, you know, emotionally withholding and uptight, closed off, you know, and I think in that way, both Laurel and Susanna see or would like to see a little bit of themselves reflected in Bonrad, like their little faves together. Susanna adores Belly and loves to see herself in Belly, her special girl, which is true, and that's like their little fantasy paper dolls perfect ship. Now the second facet of this, I believe, is perhaps even more sad. Susanna tells Belly not once, but twice, to take care of Conrad in very integral moments in the books. Not even look after each other or take care of my boys. Take care of Conrad. He needs you. Here in book 1, after Belly finds out about Susanna's cancer, she says, "You'll look after him, won't you?" She says, "Who?" Susanna says, "You know who." And Belly says, "Yes." And Susanna says, "Good, he needs you." And then again, the last time Belly sees her before she dies, Susanna says, "Don't hate Conrad. Connie's having a hard time with all this. It's a lot. Don't let him push you away. He needs you. He loves you, you know," even though he has never done anything to tell her this. Then she says, "Do you love him?" Belly doesn't answer, and Susanna says, "Will you do something for me?" And again, she says, "Look after him for me. Will you do that?" Again. And I think this is a huge part of what it boils down to. She wants Conrad to be taken care of, and specifically, she wants to pass the task of emotionally regulating and deciphering and taking care of her problematic, complicated son onto another woman like her who she believes is equipped for the task. And it also, of course, ties in perfectly with her messy little ship, so it works perfectly. And sadly, she does not assert anything like this with Jeremiah because she doesn't worry about him as much, because he handles himself better, yes, but also just because she does not pay attention to him or prioritize him in the way that she does with Conrad. And this moment in book 1 tells me everything I need to know. So in the book, both Conrad and Jeremiah know about Susanna's cancer the whole summer, and Conrad is getting drunk and being a jerk to everyone and getting into fights, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, Conrad, what are you doing? But Jeremiah is so his sweet, sunny, nice to everybody, takes care of things self that nobody even notices anything is wrong with him. And Belly overhears Laurel and Susanna talking, and of course Belly doesn't actually know what they're talking about, but Laurel's like, oh my gosh, like Conrad's being so troublesome, he left these beer bottles out. And Susanna says, I think he knows something's up. He's been like this for months now. He's so sensitive. I know it's going to hit him harder. Like seriously, I think that really says it all. His feelings are simply not taken seriously, and there's a lot of examples of this. And I think two things can exist at once, because obviously Susanna did adore Jeremiah and they did have a special relationship. And the interesting thing is, I wouldn't even say that Susanna necessarily liked Conrad better. I think she was closer with Jer, and that's very clear because, I mean, honestly, like who wouldn't be? He's like a terror to be around. But she prioritized him more and overlooked Jeremiah as a result. It wasn't just their father. She very much contributed to that dynamic and let it happen. And as much as you can see that she loves him, she is constantly making things about Conrad in front of him. Like, let's just examine how Bonrad focused this woman was. She's extremely giddy and happy about them going to prom and their relationship in the show, because they don't have one in the books. And she's expecting Jeremiah to listen to her talk about all this. And even in the book too, like asking him like if Conrad can borrow his tux. And in the book, it's especially sad because she does all this while never even acknowledging or realizing that Jeremiah had feelings for Belly when it was so obvious. Although I will say in the show, it's almost just as bad. She does eventually realize in the show, and I do think this is a sweet scene, but it's kind of really upsetting that in the show, she had knowledge that Belly and Jeremiah had been together. Like she knew about the love triangle, that they had like hooked up, and she still like dismissed his feelings until this point. Like she does take some accountability for it, and I do like this scene. I think it's very sweet, but really, like this is kind of just something she historically does. Her first reaction is so often to start talking about Conrad or Conrad and Belly, like, oh, Connie seemed like his old self today, didn't he? He was so happy. Meanwhile, Jeremiah is miserable. And oh, I asked him to take her to the Deb ball. Like, of course you asked Conrad to take her to the Deb ball. And then even when Belly is talking to Susanna and she's like, yeah, Jeremiah said he didn't mind taking me. And Susanna's like, yeah, he would do anything for you. And then she's like, they both would. Like, can he have a moment? Why does Cornflake always have to be brought up? He can't though. And it's like, that was in his contract when he was born, I guess. Not in this house, not in this family. And as much as I would like to be hopeful about show Susanna, we did see her acknowledge that and have full knowledge of the love triangle and the fact that Jeremiah is in love with Belly. And yet she still turned around and told Belly to take care of Conrad. So I really don't know. Like, I would hope, but unfortunately, the Bonrad agenda from her does make sense. My friend, I am right there with you. And I know I've been really coming at Susanna lately, which wasn't exactly my intention, but this really is one of the most whack things she ever said, in my opinion. Like you said, what do you mean you think one of your sons is going to take you dying harder than the other one? Why would you say that? And that's one of the reasons I brought it up, because this little passage here in book 1 told me everything I needed to know about the way Conrad is viewed versus Jeremiah. And I was like, oh, okay, I really see exactly how it is now. For context, in book 1, Belly overhears Laurel and Susanna talking, and Belly doesn't know what they're actually talking about, but they're talking about Susanna's cancer. And Laurel says, Conrad's been behaving like a little redacted, my mother said in a low voice. He left all these beer bottles out on the deck this morning for me to clean up. It's getting out of hand. Susanna sighed. I think he knows something's up. He's been like this for months now. He's so sensitive. I know it's going to hit him harder. And the worst part is, at this point in this book, Jeremiah already knows about Susanna. He has also known the whole summer, and just because he doesn't act like that, nobody even notices anything is wrong with him. And that's why this remains one of the biggest discrepancies from the book to the show, that again showed me right away that Book Conrad was so horrible that they had to reinvent him even at Jeremiah's expense to make him palatable as a love interest for today's audiences. Because if it was like the book where both boys knew the whole summer and Jeremiah simply didn't act like that, and Jeremiah was the one taking care of things while Conrad was acting up the whole summer, then the differences would have been made clear right away. The show had to give Conrad these uniquely sympathetic angles that don't exist in the books to make him palatable. And although I love Show Jer, and I think he is still overwhelmingly the better option, the most sympathetic character, and I think those differences are still clear and become clear later on, it's so obvious. And if I was going to try to like rationalize what Susanna is saying here, I think she's saying it because like she knows Conrad is going to be the bigger problem because Jeremiah handles himself better, and like I said, she doesn't worry about him as much. But the way they really act like he doesn't have feelings, and then she repeats it with the, oh, Conrad's sensitive, don't hate him, take care of him, Belly, please look after him, he needs you. And like you said, why would you say something like that? It's not a competition. Why would your younger son, who adores you, mama's boy himself, not take your death as hard as your older son? And they all spent so much time trying to decipher and decode the mysterious puzzle of Conrad's moods and emotions and catering to him and prioritizing him. Meanwhile, they dumped that onto Belly, saying like indirectly, you can fix him and I'm counting on you to do it. Not only enforcing that with Belly, but simultaneously neglecting and dismissing the whole other son because he doesn't act like a huge jerk to everybody. Apparently his feelings matter less and are more easily dismissed. I really just can't get over it. Not only is it Conrad's better and more valuable because he's athletically and academically gifted, but also Jeremiah's feelings and emotions matter less or are not as serious, so we can dismiss them. Like, Connie is so sensitive and Jeremiah isn't? And you thought I would root against him. You really thought that.
Okay, y'all really need to understand this, but you never lose money. You only gain things of value. The only time money leaves my bank account is when I have the belief that what I'm exchanging it for is more valuable than money itself. Because do not forget, money itself has no value. It literally by itself is worthless. It represents value. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy hot dog buns and sausages and mustard and whatever the heck you buy, you don't lose $50. You gained things of value represented by $50. So can you not see from this perspective that even spending money is actually super abundant, because every time you do it, you are gaining something of value. Likewise, every time you offer something of value, that is exchanged for money. You earn money. That's so abundant. So the money circulatory wheel, the circulatory nature of money, is so abundant in and of itself. Whether you are exchanging something of value or whether you are offering money in exchange for something of value, it's all abundance. So if you only remember this for the rest of your life, it will completely transform your relationship to money and your scarcity programming. But every time you spend money, you don't lose anything. You only gain something that you perceive to be valuable.
When I was first educating myself about Palestine and Israel and what was going on, I was very stressed at first because this had always been framed as something that was this long history that was so complicated, that was so complex that the average person would just never be able to understand. And I genuinely believe that that is a tactic used by Western powers and Western media to deter their populations from going and doing just even small amounts of research and employing critical thinking skills. Because I think if you lay the facts out just clearly, any sane, logical person can only come away with one conclusion, and that's free Palestine. It's really easy, especially when you're not educated on this topic at all, to drown under all the propaganda and disinformation that's constantly being shared. And that's by reputable sources. This is by journalists and heads of states and whole governments telling you this. It's really easy to believe in the lies and the narratives that they're trying to paint out. And I think that's why I genuinely have a couple basic points that help me understand what's real and what's not, and I'm going to share them. My first point being, to even begin to understand this, you need to first understand this is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is not an Israeli-Palestinian war. This is a genocide against the Palestinian people. This is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people by the Israeli state, backed by the US and other world powers, and supported by Zionists. Simple. I think the second point to understand, and understand it very clearly, because this is a point that the Israeli state and Western media will shout from the rooftops constantly, and it's the fact that they try to connect Zionism, the Israeli state, and Judaism, because as soon as you're against Israel, all of a sudden you're anti-Semitic. As soon as you're against Zionism, all of a sudden you're anti-Semitic. That is not the case. How many Jewish people have come out and said they do not support the Israeli state and they do not support Zionism? Because being in support of Palestinians and their fight for freedom and justice and liberation has nothing to do with being anti-Semitic. That is just something that they do as a scare tactic. And then my third point is related to this quote from Walter Rodney, and it says, "We were told that violence in itself is evil, and that whatever the cause, it is unjustified morally. But by what standard of morality can the violence used by a slave to break his chains be considered the same as the violence of a slave master?" And this is brought up because when Palestinians were literally being killed every day, thousands, hundreds, whole families wiped out, whole neighborhoods bombed and destroyed, there was not a squeak from the international community. There was no calls for peace, to end violence. But when the oppressed group of people want to now bear arms because enough has been enough, now you guys want to equate the violence as if it's on the same scale, as if it's the same thing even. Ridiculous, because it's not. I think that it's just very evident that only a select group of people are allowed to use violence as a measure, and their violence is painted out to be righteous and just and smart even. And when oppressed people, when brown and black people, when ethnic people use that same violence to liberate themselves after being subjugated to the worst human conditions, all of a sudden it's barbaric, it's inhumane, and we have no right, and the Palestinians have no right. My last point is, terror cells and terrorist groups do not just spawn from some deep, dark underbelly of the world. There's context behind why they came about. And a lot of the times, you'll actually notice it's these imperialist powers that will go into countries that they have vested interests in, and they will actually create and fund these terrorist groups as a way to destabilize the countries, to create conflict and chaos so that they could have an excuse to stay and occupy these countries. Now, when these same terror groups and terror cells turn around and start attacking them, they also now use it as another excuse, like, look, we are being attacked, so we are going to bomb the living Christ out of these countries. And they do this every time. And it genuinely only takes a couple minutes of research to go see the direct link between the Israeli state and the creation and funding of Hamas. But instead, all of these Western journalists want to be lazy and invite innocent Palestinian civilians and place the burden of Hamas and these atrocities that they're committing onto them, instead of turning their fingers and pointing their fingers at the Israeli state for actually causing this problem once again, for causing this violence once again. And in relation to that all, to even say terrorist and this terrorist label, these imperialist, colonial, evil people will attach that label to anybody that they don't like. They are not bombing Hamas, they're bombing Palestinians. They just do it under the label of Hamas. They did that with the Black liberation movements. How many assassination of Black leaders, and even calling the Black Panther Party terrorists? Anybody that is against their interests, they will label as a terrorist. So do not just listen to what the Western media is telling you, oh, this person's a terrorist, this person's a terrorist. That is the word that they use, the little buzzword that they use to justify the atrocities that they commit in the Middle East, point blank. The final thing that I'm going to say is a lot of people on social media are talking about, I'm not on the Israeli side, I'm not on the Palestinian side, I'm on the side of peace. I'm here to say that the side of peace is the Palestinian side. And if you are going to disavow violence and Hamas and innocent Israelis being killed, that means you are not in support of the Israeli state and the Israeli government, and that you are in support of Palestinian liberation from the occupation and their land being returned to them, and them being afforded the rights as a country to live and to breathe in peace. That is all.
When are we going to be honest with ourselves and admit that women are not getting plastic surgery for themselves? Like, be for real, you would not get a BBL if you lived alone on an island. Like, what about risking your life and adding fat to your butt is for yourself? And before you get angry, I have plastic surgery, and let me explain. Hear me out. I'm not saying women don't feel that way. I'm sure that a lot of people that have gotten plastic surgery have felt like it's for themselves. However, feelings are not isolated. When you feel something, that feeling could be influenced by societal standards. That feeling could be influenced by other people's opinion. So while someone can have an opinion as in, I would feel more attractive with a BBL, I think they 100% feel that way and they are attracted to women that have those type of body types. However, the reason why they're attracted has been influenced by the patriarchy. And before you say, it's not for the male gaze, real question. Who gets more BBLs, lesbians or gay men? Right. There's more gay men that get BBLs than lesbians. If you look at feminine presenting gay men, a lot of them are getting a fuck ton of plastic surgery. They're getting nose jobs. They're getting BBLs. I mean, like, look at Jeffree Star. Look at James Charles. That is because they are attracted to men, and the male gaze also affects other men. If women are doing them for themselves without the male gaze, like, you would see more women that do not date men get plastic surgery. But it's also really important to note that we don't live in a utopia. Unfortunately, beauty is now tied to class, because to be beautiful is to be rich, to have all the money to afford all these beauty regimens. And unfortunately, a lot of people's beauty does affect their financial opportunities. Like in Korea, a lot of people get double eyelid surgery to land jobs. This is a reality of the situation. You can want plastic surgery for yourself and still acknowledge that that attraction and those feelings have been influenced by the patriarchy.
If you think men and women are equal, then you think women should be drafted, right? No. I don't think women should be drafted, and I don't think men should be drafted either. Who's gonna fight the war then? Nobody. I don't think we should have wars. And before you're like, oh, that is so stupid, like, I really truly believe it is never deep enough to have a war. I think war is immature. I think we should start talking to each other like adults. And I feel like if you are a world leader who is upset about, for example, like the border of your country, and you can't come to a civil agreement, you shouldn't be in charge of a country. If somebody needs to get shot over that, you are not good at your job. I think if we all just grow up and decide, hey, we should stop having wars, things would go a lot better. Nobody wants to get shot, and yet we're still shooting. Let's not do that. Oh, I want oil from the Middle East. Ask nicely. And if they say no, just accept their no instead of being a huge baby about it. Oh my god, I think this entire group of people should be wiped off the face of the earth. Eat a snack. Take a beach vacation. Go to therapy and learn how to mind your own business. They do not need to die. That's never gone well. Stop. Grow up.
Reason number 675 why I'm deeply unwell is I watched the exclusive clip that the Hunger Games account just released of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where Rachel Zegler, as Lucy Gray Baird, is playing the hanging tree. And I realized that the tree that she's sitting under, the tree that she's sitting under is the same tree that Katniss is sitting under in the epilogue of Mockingjay when she is cradling her daughter and watching Peeta play with their son, indicating that the piece that Lucy Gray Baird never got is the piece that Katniss got. I'm going to crack open my window and...
All right, I'm not going to stay silent on this. It's simply too important. And if you follow me on other platforms, you probably already know that I have been very closely keeping up with what's been going on in the world and reposting as much as I can. I'm not an expert in geopolitics. I think that's probably pretty obvious. This is a media page. And there are people on this app doing vitally important and very brave work, sharing just illuminating so important information. But one thing I do know is media, and I want to talk about it a little bit. And I've gotten a lot of pushback on this page from people telling me not to make everything political, to keep politics out of movies, when that's absurd. Art has been political since day one. Not only does the media we consume deeply, shape who we are as people, it has the ability to shape culture and shift public perception and influence actual social change. The media that we love and celebrate is hugely important in shaping our worldview, and that matters a lot because the media that we're even exposed to is curated by the powerful. Controlling the narrative has been one of the most powerful tools in the oppressor's arsenal for literally millennia. Whose stories even get told, the perspective they're told from, the audience reach. These are all ways of controlling the narrative and public perception. These are all ways of continuing to silence oppressed people, because if they don't have a voice to speak for themselves, it's so much easier to dehumanize them and justify violence against them. And for so long, the Palestinian people have been stripped of their voice. They have been so readily dehumanized by Western media. So in addition to not looking away from what is happening in Gaza right now, I think we owe it to the Palestinian people to celebrate their lives and their humanity. And the best way I know how to do that is by sharing some of their art. I have compiled a list of some incredible Palestinian films and a couple of documentaries that share their history and their stories and their experiences, which have largely been ignored in the West for far too long. I believe that art is one of, if not the most powerful tool we have as humans in cultivating empathy for people who have different experiences than us and just connecting on a human level. And these films deeply resonated with me, and I really hope you check them out. So first on the list is Farha, and this is about a young Palestinian girl in 1948. This is available on Netflix US, by the way, during the Nakba, when the British troops pulled out of Palestine and the ensuing violent massacre of Palestinians in order to forcibly remove them from the land. It's very harrowing, it's beautifully told, and it's very important history. And for more information on that, I would also check out the incredible documentary 1948 Creation and Catastrophe, which is about the Nakba. And what makes this documentary unique is that they interviewed survivors, both Palestinians and Israeli soldiers, many of whom feel deep regret for what happened. They tell firsthand accounts of a lot of the horrors that are undisputed historically now and just aren't widely known. Omar is a beautiful story that was actually nominated for Best International Feature at the Oscars in 2013, and it's about three childhood friends growing up in occupied Palestine and the way that their friendship, the pressures that exist just from living in an occupied state. It's beautiful. It's a tragic romance. It's an incredibly moving film, and I highly recommend it. The Present is a short film also on Netflix. It's only 24 minutes long, and it is about a man and his daughter trying to buy an anniversary gift for his wife in occupied Palestine, and how difficult that turns out to be when you live in an occupied apartheid state. It's deeply moving, and it's a quick watch. I would definitely recommend it. I haven't gotten a chance to watch this one yet, but The Time That Remains follows a family through 1948 and the Nakba and the creation of the State of Israel all the way through the present. It was made in 2009, and it catalogs the experiences of Palestinian throughout that time in a family setting. I'm very much looking forward to watching it. It's very highly reviewed. I'd definitely check it out. Fiber and Cameras is another documentary that I unfortunately haven't gotten to watch yet, but it's very high on my watch list. It's about a Palestinian farmer who engages in peaceful protest and purchases cameras in order to document his own life. That was his intention, but was met with increasingly violent protests and intentional efforts to prevent him from documenting his life. It's also very critically acclaimed, and I'm very much looking forward to watching it. If you believe nothing else, I sincerely hope you believe that the lives and stories and humanity of Palestinians deserve to be heard too, and they deserve to be the ones telling their own stories. So I hope that you give them that chance. So stories about bad or deeply flawed men have been very popular throughout history. They're some of the most celebrated works of art in media and literature and all forms of media for a very long time, and understandably so. Flawed characters are super interesting. It's understandable that creatives would be drawn to that kind of archetype. The issue that I run into consistently, though, is that a lot of these stories still center around a male perspective, and they focus on the damage that these men do to the women in their lives. And while that is often interesting, often very well told, and results in fantastic art, it still kind of consistently forces women into like a passive kind of role, into the backseat of their own stories of oppression, which can feel frustrating when it just feels like the only narrative being told. And that is refreshingly, of course, not the case with Sofia Coppola's most recent film, Priscilla. I've been a fan of Sofia Coppola's work for a very long time. I think that she is a through and through auteur. I think that she has a very singular perspective. She definitely does not speak to like universal experiences of womanhood. It's a very specific perspective, but it's a perspective that she does incredibly well. And she also has this just like very strong, unapologetic femininity that's injected into all of her films, both stylistically and through story choices, that I think is just really wonderful and brave and kind of rock and roll, honestly. And as someone who's really enjoyed like the majority of her work, Priscilla achieves something new. It's so confident in its quietness. It has a level of restraint that I think speaks to the loneliness and the suffering that this woman suffered. I think that a lot of the characters she's addressed before had at least a little bit more autonomy, or at the very least a little bit more of a rebellious streak. Priscilla speaks to this kind of isolation that women can feel when they're put on this pedestal that's essentially a cage. And one of the things I liked most about this film, and one of the reasons why I think it's so important to tell stories like this from this perspective specifically, is that the kind of strength that it takes to endure and free yourself from these kinds of predatory relationships with staunch power imbalances, and a situation that women often find themselves in, is that the kind of strength that it takes for you to find yourself and free yourself doesn't look like how it does in the movies. It's not this sensationalized, sexy, like girl boss, fuck you, empowerment idea. It takes a resolve that can destroy you all on its own. And you have to kind of build yourself back up from that. And I think that it's something that a lot of women fundamentally understand, and it's a perspective that is so, so important and very underrepresented in film. I was genuinely so moved by this film. It's absolutely stunning to look at. The music, as always, in Sofia Coppola's films is just absolutely perfect. The performances, Jacob Elordi is incredible, and Cailee Spaeny was an absolute revelation. Also, the fact that Priscilla herself was so involved, and it's based on her memoir, is just so wonderful. I mean, if you're already a fan of Sofia Coppola, this is definitely like a home run. But I genuinely think that like general audiences will get so much out of this film. It's wonderful. Please see it.
Read The Hunger Games, you're told pretty quickly that Panem, where Katniss lives, used to be the United States of America. You're not told what really happened to the rest of the world, but you're told what happened to the United States of America, which is that there was this very, very large war. And that very, very large war basically ended the world, or at least ended the United States as you know it, and it formed Panem, which has the capital and had 13 districts, and now only has 12 because the District 13 got taken out when they tried to have a rebellion. So District 13 is used as a continuous scare tactic by the capital to say basically that the capital can do whatever they want to its citizens, and they can do it at any time. They're the ones with the power, they're the ones with the weapons. Now, when you read The Hunger Games, while you're told that everything takes place in America, in the United States, you don't actually know exactly where everything takes place. You don't know the exact size of everything, and you don't know what parts of the country, the original country of the United States of America, everything takes place. You just know that there are 12 districts, and Katniss goes from her district up the 12 to wherever she is. Now, from my understanding of it, Katniss is supposed to be in like the Delaware region, which really changes what I had always thought as a kid. But what I had thought as a child is that District 1 was Connecticut. Why did I think District 1 is Connecticut? Because I grew up in Connecticut. And funnily enough, Suzanne Collins lives in Connecticut, or at least she lived in Connecticut when The Hunger Games was originally published. Now, when you grow up in Connecticut, something that you learn pretty quickly, pretty early on, because Connecticut really likes to teach you about its history. Think The Vampire Diaries with Mystic Falls, which, like, you learn everything about the Mystic Falls founding families and everything that happened there and how they handled the wars and things like that. Connecticut is that times 12, because Mystic Falls is supposed to take place in Virginia, but not the Virginia of the original times. It's a whole thing. Learning the history of America is an entire thing. So when you live in Connecticut, the number one thing that you learn is how Connecticut handled manufacturing, and specifically how they handled manufacturing weaponry. Connecticut made a large amount of its money off of the backs of wars, both run by the United States of America and run by its allies. Now, because of that, Connecticut was known for a really long time as being one of the wealthiest states in America, if not in the world, because America was at one point known as being one of the wealthiest places in the world. I'm bringing all of this up for two reasons. One is that Israel is now one of the top producers of weaponry in the world. Two, they like to test that weaponry on Palestinians in Gaza. Three, the United States helps them, and the United States helps them a lot. The United States and many other countries are willing to give Israel quite a bit of money for their weapons, for what they do with those weapons, and for what they make with those weapons. And governments don't care who it hurts in the process, in the long run, because everything is how you put it, how you section it, how you bring it up in the media with language, because language is one of the most important things that you can use in your defense. The pen is mightier than the sword for a very specific reason, and the very specific reason is that you can turn any sentence one way or another with the emphasis of one word. America runs on capitalism. The world runs on capitalism. The world runs on what we rely on. That's why people are boycotting. That's why people are talking about it, because we need to keep talking about what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in Gaza to the Palestinian people. Because if we stop talking about it, people will think it stopped. And it has not stopped. And it will not stop until we make it stop. So that's why we're boycotting Starbucks, and that's why we're boycotting McDonald's and Disney Plus and all of these places, because we need to make sure that our voices are heard. And the way that people in the government hear our voices is when we hit them where their money goes. Because Connecticut had the biggest influence in the world at one point. Let me take that back. Connecticut did not have the biggest influence in the world, but Connecticut had a really big influence in the United States at one point in time, because they made the weapons and they did the things with the weapons. The United States of America still has a really big influence on the rest of the world, because they do make weapons and they do fund weaponry elsewhere, and that's why Israel also has a really big voice. We have to find a way to be bigger than that voice, because we need to make sure that Palestine is free. Okay, thank you. I've been trying to talk about this for a while and I haven't been able to find the right words, so I'm sorry if this video was choppy. Hunger Games for the first time when I was 12 years old. I am 28 years old now. This was a long time ago. So that being said, when I first read The Hunger Games, I thought nothing like this could ever happen. Now, when I say this, I do also need to mention that when I was 12 years old, my biggest historical obsession, I've made videos about this before, and how teenage girls' Roman Empire is a concept of historical tragedy. My historical tragedy that I read as much as I possibly could about for a very long period of time was the Holocaust. And I wanted to know everything that I could about the Holocaust and the teenage girls specifically who were in that, who lost their families, who lost their lives, who lost everyone around them. Because I wanted to understand how something like that could happen, so you can understand the signs that come with it. But even that being said, even having been so, even having been so interested in the Holocaust, I read The Hunger Games and I just thought, this could never happen. Nothing like this could ever happen. This is a dystopian novel, but it could never happen to us. And here's the thing, right now, really similar things are happening to the world. And we are the capital and we're watching the districts suffer. And we're watching people lose their lives in real time on our phones as the worst possible things imaginable are happening to an entire society of people in this tiny little strip of land that is an open air prison that they are not allowed to leave, that they have no ability to leave whatsoever without the explicit permission of Israel, who's not going to give them permission at all, who keeps saying, hey, you're in this hospital, leave this hospital, go to this hospital, or go somewhere else, go to the south, we won't bomb you there. And then they do. And then they do. Because It's all about the lies that come along with it. It's about saying, we're protecting you, we're helping you, we just want Hamas out of the way, but they're making the the young 20-something girls who are journalists, who are literally journaling everything that is happening to them in this travesty. And they're saying now that these girls, that these journalists, that these adult men who have just lost their families and are still reporting everything that's happening in Gaza, because if they don't, who will? They're saying that these people work for Hamas. And why are they doing that? To make them targets. To say it's okay for us to target these specific people because they are actually terrorists. They are actually working for Hamas. They are the enemy. And by saying that these journalists are the enemy, you're not only ruining free speech, which they didn't fully have in the first place, but you're also saying it's okay to make someone like this a target. They're not a citizen. They're not a real person. They're a terrorist. And why does that sound familiar? Because Katniss Everdeen, I don't know if you remember, book 1, she's in the Hunger Games. Book 2, she's used as a pawn by the Capitol, and then she doesn't do everything exactly how President Snow wanted her to, because she never would have been able to, because of his whole thing with the last victor, or the first victor of District 12. And so he sends her back to the Hunger Games. And in book 3, she gets sent to District 13. And in District 13, she's used as their pawn. And because she's used as their pawn with everything that's going on, she is called, in capital Panem terms, a terrorist. She's said to be evil. She's said to be out of her mind. And she's against the Capitol, so therefore she's against everyone in Panem. And because she's against everyone in Panem and against everyone in the Capitol, she is enemy number 1. And by saying that this 16, 17, 18-year-old girl is enemy number 1, what happens? What can they do? They can shoot her without her being considered a martyr by the people in the Capitol who don't understand exactly how bad it truly is out there. And that's horrifying. And that's terrifying. And that's why I really want people to please, if you live in the United States of America, today is election day. Go out, vote, make sure that your voices are heard, because we don't get another chance like this specific thing, like this specific voting day for a year. I know it's hard to vote. I know that the US tries to make it very difficult to actually get out and vote because it's not an actual day that you get off unless you're a school kid, because apparently the kids get the day off because that's where all the election places are hosted. But adults with real 9-to-5 jobs, or I don't want to say that only 9-to-5 jobs are real. Please know that I am not saying that. But adults with jobs who work at Starbucks, who work in coffee shops, who work in office, who work anywhere, don't tend to get this specific day off unless they request it off. And companies only give so many days off for one specific day, right? So that being said, America may make it really hard for you to vote and get your voice heard, but I really hope that you will go out and that you will vote. Thank you. And someone made a really good point, which is that we are boycotting Disney, so maybe I should not use my Disney Princess cups for a while. They're mostly the only cups that I have that don't leak, so I am hiding Disney Princesses. So, bye guys.
I'm getting a lot of comments about Rachel Zegler on my recent video about the Hunger Games and the comparisons between Katniss and Lucy Gray. There are so many hate comments about Rachel Zegler, and although I do not know this girl personally, obviously, I do think that this whole hate train surrounding her, forget about me being a Hunger Games fan, the punishment, you guys, does not match the crime. This girl said a couple things that may be considered cringy to some people. I didn't really give a shit, but to other people, it may be cringy. But the onslaught of hate that she got and is still receiving about those Snow White comments, and there's so many people saying they don't want to see the Hunger Games movie because of that. Are you good? I literally just saw somebody comment saying they're not going to watch that movie because she doesn't deserve support. What? Y'all, seek help.